Come follow me this morning on my journey to finding my roots as I make chocolate chip cookies that are mostly nutritious. We're going to be starting with freshly milled flour and they will be delicious. Chocolate chip cookie recipe comes from Felicia over at Grains and Grit. I've made it twice and hoping that this batch turns out just as well because I'm taking it to a cookout this afternoon. We're starting with soft white wheat, which is the wheat that's typically recommended for recipes that don't contain yeast. The sweetener is going to be cane sugar, which is processed, but it's not, doesn't have any anti-caking agents, fillers, or anything like that that you might find in other typical white sugar. And it also still contains some of the molasses. That's what gives it its darker color. And in place of brown sugar, I'm using Sucanat, S-U-C-A-N-A-T. It's basically you take the cane juice, you dehydrate it, and you get what's left. It's full of nutrition. I think most of the minerals are still in there, contains all of the molasses, and it's worked really quite well for me. I'll show you that up close when we measure it out. And then we've got chocolate chips. These are Ghirardelli chocolate chips. I typically try to use organic foods, but the organic chocolate chips that I was buying have gone off the chart astronomical price-wise. So Ghirardelli dark chocolate it is. I've got baking soda, real salt, homemade vanilla extract, eggs from the backyard, organic cultured butter, unsalted. I buy this from Azure Standard. This is a 1 pound pack and I buy 15 at a time because I get a good price on them. I put them in the freezer. And then I've got 2 different scales and my timer out, and we're going to work on this together, and I'll show you step by step how these cookies come together. The first thing we're going to do is weigh out our grains. Again, these are soft white wheat grains, and I need 546 grams to equal 3.5 cups of flour. So we're going to see what this is cup-wise as far as the grains go. I just weigh it, so I'm not sure what that turns out to be. So this is a 1/2 cup measuring cup. So that's 1 cup. Two cups. 3 cups. 3 cups took us well over what we needed. It was 571 and we need 546. So I'll take a little bit out. So really close to 3 cups. I only took out maybe a tablespoon. So we're going to take this over to the mill and have some beautiful flour in just a moment. Since this mill is new to me, I ran a little bit of flour through to see what type of texture I could get. The last batch I ran through would be too fine, I think, for cookies. It was perfect for pizza. So I've adjusted the knob a little bit where it's not so fine, and I'm going to turn it back 1 click because I see a good bit of bran in there, which is good. We want the bran. That's wonderful fiber and nutrition. So I'm going to mill this and we'll be back to see how it turned out. And while this is milling, I'm going to be over prepping my other ingredients and getting those weighed out. Here we go. I'm going to show you the flour turned out beautifully. I hope you can see that. And it took a little longer than I anticipated, which is fine because I'm doing other things while the mill is doing its work. And normally I would be measuring out all of my other ingredients while this was milling, but although this mill is much, much quieter than my old one, I didn't feel like I wanted to try to talk over that noise. So here we are to get the rest of the ingredients measured out and going. So we're gonna put the butter in the Anchor Shroom mixing bowl. I'm just gonna weigh the butter right into that. We need 227 grams of salted, unsalted, softened, or room temperature butter. I'm kind of learning to eyeball things. I have no idea what 227 grams really looks like, but I'm gonna cut this and put it in the bowl and see what we come up with. Okay, so that was 146 grams. It's the equivalent, the 227 grams is the equivalent of 1 cup. That's 235 grams. We're gonna go with that. I don't think that tiny little bit of extra butter will make that much of a difference as far as the texture of the dough. So there's our butter. I'm going to zero this out, or tare, T-A-R-E. That means to clear it out to 0. And then we need 106 grams of cane sugar, which is about 1/2 cup. That did not clear. So clear that. And I'm gonna measure 106 grams of cane sugar. Well, that didn't work out well. I over poured, but I can easily just take my spoon and scoop some out, put it back in the container. 110 grams, 109 grams, close enough. And clear the scale out again. And we want 170 grams of brown sugar or sucanat. And that's also, that's actually 1 cup. So I'm gonna show you how dark this is. Hope you can see that. The lighting is not the best over here, but that's just really nice sweetener loaded with nutrition, and we need 170 grams of that. I'm gonna be a little bit more careful with pouring this in since I already have the other sugar. If I overdo it, I don't want to have to take any out. One hundred 170 grams on the nose. And one of the nice things about weighing your ingredients instead of measuring them is you can see so far I've only used a spoon to put that in, and that really comes in handy with things like butter. You've not messed up a measuring cup, and if you're weighing things like honey and oil, honey is really hard to measure in a measuring cup and get it all out. Not hard, but just leave some residue in there, and honey's too expensive to be leaving any in the cup. So I'm going to take this over here to my mixer. Let's see if we can get that set up there. And this bowl fits right on there. And I've got a roller and a scraper or blade, scraper that scrapes the sides of the bowl. And we're gonna cream this butter and sugar until it's nicely incorporated. This is gonna look totally different than what you're used to seeing with, say, a KitchenAid stand mixer that has a different type of beater, or even your handheld mixer. So we're gonna turn this, got it on low speed, and I'm gonna just turn it on. I'm not gonna set the timer on it, and I'm just gonna let this start mixing. Might have to just kind of chop that butter a little bit. It's not quite as soft as I normally would have it because I'm kind of in a hurry this morning to get this done. I didn't want to bake these last night. I wanted them to be as fresh as possible to share with people who may not have ever had a chocolate chip cookie made with freshly milled flour and all of these other good ingredients. So I kind of might have rushed my butter a little bit. I have put it in the microwave on a low power so as not to melt it, and that worked well too. I didn't really think about doing that this morning, so hopefully you can see what's going on in there. It's been just a couple of minutes and this is coming together nicely. Let's turn the speed down so you can see. It's blended pretty well, but because that sucanat is much larger granules, I'm going to let it blend a little bit longer than I would if it was just cane sugar. So we're going to give it a couple more minutes and see how it does. Occasionally I'll take this scraper that fits perfectly. It's designed to fit perfectly in this bowl, and I'll scrape the sides. And let it continue. I think that's creamed about as much as I want it. You can see it's nice and fluffy. And we're going to go ahead and add our other ingredients. I'm going to measure out the baking soda, 6.5 grams or 1 teaspoon. It's a little bit too much. 6.4. Zero that out. Add 6.5 grams of salt or 1 teaspoon. Six point five. Everything else weighed out that I need. I've got my baking soda and salt weighed here. I'm going to go ahead and just dump that in my flour and just kind of give it a mix. The recipe says to sift it. You know, that may be a good idea, but I'm going to just stir it in. It'll get very well incorporated while this mixer does its job. I don't want to mix it too much once it actually gets in the mixer. That's probably one of the reasons why you need to sift it in, because if you mix it too much, once the wet ingredients are added, you're going to start creating a gluten structure, which you'll have gluten in this once it gets wet, but you don't want the gluten to really form like it would if you were making a bread or a pizza dough. You want it to stay soft and not get to like a stretchy place that would make the cookies really dense. So I think that's stirred up enough. I'm going to take you back over to the mixer and we'll get all of these ingredients added. I forgot to measure my vanilla out and I weighed it as well. It's 2 teaspoons or 16 grams. And our next step is to add the eggs and the vanilla and get that mixed up really well. And I'm going to crack, I don't know if you can see, crack these eggs into the little measuring cup that I've been weighing the smaller ingredients like the salt, the baking soda, and the vanilla. I'm gonna crack these eggs in one at a time so they don't, make sure that there's no shells in there. So I have been known to crack them directly into my mixer and get a shell and see, like just that right there. I'll get that shell out of there, get it in, make sure my mixer's on low, and turn it on to get that incorporated. This is a step where you want to, and I recognize that most people don't have this mixer. In the fresh milled flour world, a lot of people do have this mixer because freshly milled flour is much stronger. I don't want to say it gets tougher, but the mixers don't hold up to the freshly milled flour. I have a KitchenAid mixer that I was using, and I almost burned it up, and I've got too many attachments that go to that mixer to want to kill it milling freshly milled flour. So I did a lot of research and settled on this particular mill for the freshly milled flour. It's been wonderful. It's got some other attachments that I've made butter, whipped cream in probably 2 minutes or less. So that looks good. So now we're going to add our flour, which is the last ingredient before we add our chocolate chips. And like I said earlier, we're not going to let this mix for very long because we don't want that gluten to develop. So we'll just get that dumped in here. Once we get this incorporated nicely, we'll dump the chocolate chips in, let it take just a little bit of a spin to get incorporated. And we'll put it in the refrigerator. That's good enough for me. That's a lot of chocolate chips. I've honestly felt like I need to reduce the amount of chips that the recipe calls for, but I think most people probably want a good bit of chips in their cookies, so I've left it just like the recipe calls for. That looks good. So I'm going to take you in a little closer and we can look at that dough. That cookie dough is beautiful. I'm going to take it out of here, take you over to the other counter where I'm going to show you how I wrap it up in some saran wrap. Put it in the refrigerator to cool, because I've learned that if your dough is cool, when you put it on your pan and put it in the oven, they don't flatten out as much, and they make a beautiful, tall, gorgeous chocolate chip cookies. I'm going to show you one other thing with this mixer. This roller, you know, you can see that the dough is clogged up on there, for lack of better words. Well, this scraper has a little notch on it that scrapes that roller off just perfectly. I know my hands are probably getting in the way, but it cleans it off very well. And also I'll take this scraper out, scrape that off, and then we'll get it over to the counter to get it wrapped up for the refrigerator. I'm just going to take some plastic wrap and I don't know how much I need, that's probably plenty, and scrape this dough out onto the wrap. This wonderful scraper that fits so nicely. I'm really tempted to eat some of this dough. I don't typically eat sugary things. My favorite yeast roll recipe has some cane sugar in it, just a little bit. My favorite bread recipe has honey in it, and But when I'm making these cookies, I really like to just take a bite of it. One thing I've learned along my journey of finding my roots is that the danger of eating uncooked cookie dough, you see how I just rolled that into a log, then I'm going to get it wrapped up. But the danger of eating uncooked cookie dough is as much about the uncooked flour as it is the raw eggs. I'm not concerned about the raw eggs in mine because we have our own chickens. They get a pretty, maybe not 100% organic diet, but a pretty healthy diet, and they provide us with some beautiful eggs. I even put them raw when I make an ice cream. I have no concerns whatsoever, but I didn't know that the raw flour is one of the big issues with eating raw cookie dough. So I keep learning on this journey, and I hope to pass some of that information on to you. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator for probably about 30 minutes. In about 15 minutes in, I'll preheat my oven, and then we'll get some cookies scooped out and get them ready to go. It's been 15 minutes since I put the cookie dough in the refrigerator, so it's time to preheat the oven, and then we'll be ready to scoop that dough out onto the cookie sheet. Oven preheated, upper oven to 350 start. Make sure my rack is in a lower position. 30 minutes since the dough was in the refrigerator, and you could leave it in there longer than that, but if you do, it gets kind of too hard. So what I'm going to do, and you might think I'm crazy, but hang with me for a minute. I'm going to weigh this dough, and I'm going to set my scale to 0. Just heard my oven beep, and I'm going to weigh it. It weighs 1,533 grams. So I'm going to divide that by 18, which is the recommended number of cookies for this recipe. If I knew how to use a calculator. Hope my calculator's working. 1,533 divided by 18 equals, each cookie should be about 85 grams. And that's not hugely important, but it does help with making sure all of cookies are uniform in size. And that would really, I think it would be an important factor if, say, if you were selling these and you wanted them to be really presentable. But it's easy enough to do this with a scale like this. I'll leave my dough on there, I zero it out, and I take a little bit off until it reaches about 85 grams. That's 84, so that's one cookie. I zero it out. 102, put a little bit back, 90, 85 grams. And you know what? I meant to spray this pan with a little bit of olive oil. This is supposed to be a non-stick pan, which overall it has been, but I have another one that I only used a couple of times. It was actually a bread pan, and it started sticking after just a few uses. So we'll zero out. Pinch a little more off, way too much, 84 grams. So I'm going to continue doing this. I'm going to space them pretty far apart. This pan is big enough to hold 3 by 5, and I'll bring you back when I have the dough, the cookie dough on the sheet and ready to go in the oven. So actually I ended up with 3 by 6 because 3 by 5 would have been 15, and I'm making 18 cookies. And these probably won't spread too much that they touch each other. I don't think they will. If they do, they'll still taste the same. And so these are like between 84 and 87 grams a piece. When I got ready to do that last one, I had about 95 grams or so left. So darn it, I had to pinch off a piece and eat it so I could keep them all uniform. So we're gonna get these in the oven and I'll bring you back. Just move this microwave over here so I could rearrange my baking station to have my mill and my mixer close to each other, and it's worked out perfectly. I could set my cookies there while I get the oven open. It's been preheating for about 20-25 minutes. Get those in there, set the timer for 12 minutes and go. Timer just went off. It's been 12 minutes. We're gonna check the cookies. I'm not a cookie baker, so I'm learning how to tell when they're really done. I would rather have them a little bit less done so they're not so dry. So let's see what these look like. Oh, they look good. Let's take them out and we'll take them over to the counter and I'll check one of them, lift one up with the spatula and see what they look like. Put the cookies back in the oven for 2 more minutes because they didn't, best I could tell, they didn't seem to be very brown at all on the bottom. And the recipe says to let them sit 1 to 2 minutes on the pan and then transfer them to this cooling rack. I've got my timer going for 2 minutes and we're gonna move them over and we'll inspect them closer. In 2 minutes, and now I'm going to transfer these to the cooling rack. See what they look like after they've cooled. These cookies are cooled. They look great. They're not too dark on the bottom. And one of them started falling apart, so I think I'll use that one to break open and we can look at the inside together. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's nice and moist. I don't think they're overdone. I cooked them for 14 minutes. Let me do a taste test. Oh my gosh. This is difficult. I, for the most part, in the last 5.5 years, have cooked my sugar addiction. Kicked my sugar addiction. But sometimes when I make something like this, I'm really, really tempted. And I'll probably eat this half before I even go. My one concern about these, and it may be a non-concern, is using the dark chocolate chips. They're pretty rich. Let me just taste and tell you how rich they are. They're pretty rich, but I like it. And I hope they're well received. And I hope that my neighbors enjoy them. One more bite. I told you I would probably eat this half before I even go. Thanks for joining me on another journey to finding my roots, where we made freshly milled chocolate chip cookies. They're huge. Straight from the whole grain to the finished product. Join me again next time where we make hamburger buns with freshly milled flour.